Hello and welcome, everybody. So, my name is Steven, and this is the show where we bring together experts to break down some of the most fundamental topics in HR. So, today's topic is employee discipline, and I have with me four amazing panelists. Here they are. Say hello, everybody. We've got Heather Anderson, who's an HR manager at SP Plus Corporation. We've got Katie Barr, who's a senior HRA intern at Amazon. We have Jessica Holzapfel, who's a next level growth business guide and fractional COO. And last but not least, we have the amazing Melinda Anderson, who is an HR director. So thank you all for being here today. This is kind of like a difficult topic. So I'm excited to kind of get into all this with you. I feel like this series so far, we've covered a lot of topics that are what should you do when things are going right, or how does it look like? But suddenly we have to acknowledge together that bad things happen in the workplace that require discipline. So I'm excited to get into all this with you. But I really just want to paint a picture to begin with on what's at stake here. Because I think there's a lot of workplaces that get a lot of big publicity around things that have gone wrong and discipline that has gone unchecked, or if there are bad things that have gone without discipline. And so I'd love to start out with a conversation at like, what's the importance of getting discipline right in your organization? And actually, Melinda, I'd love if you could kind of share your thoughts on this to kick us off.
Absolutely. So your performance as an organization is based on your employees' performance. And if somebody's not performing, ultimately your company's not going to be performing. So you need to hold people accountable. Plus, if you have your high potential employees and you allow them to the poor performers to be treated equally as the high performers, there's no motivation for people to want to continue to improve or work hard. Additionally, it happens with harassment and discrimination. If you're treating somebody inequitably or not holding people accountable for their performance, it can cause larger issues such as litigation, EEOC claims, and it can be very costly for an organization.
Yeah, that's awesome, Melinda. Heather, I know you were specifically talking a little bit before this conversation around some of that litigation and like, these legal issues that arise when you're letting bad behavior go unchecked. What's been your experience with kind of like what's at stake here with employee discipline?
Well, the EEOC is very thorough. They they have obviously tons of training with this, and what they're looking for is the company doing everything possible to be fair, to make sure that they're treating everybody equally, that they're not allowing illegal activity to continue on in a workplace, and that's really hard. There's a lot of things that employers don't always know to recognize. And actually, I think it's HR Acuity, had a great PDF that they sent out a while ago that was just examples of employee relations that you should be documenting, like, little spats with coworkers, frequently being late for work, if they're constantly talking about their religious or political beliefs to coworkers or subordinates, if they just kind of come and go as they please, or even like probably the biggest one that we see is the "oh hey hun," or "oh it's good to see you," or "good morning beautiful," like there's no ill will towards these things, but they can absolutely create these environments where it can get you into trouble. And that's kind of where the beauty of progressive discipline comes into it, is it gives you an opportunity to sit down with the employees and say, look, we know that that's not your intention, but your intention doesn't matter. It's all about how it's received, and if it's not received appropriately, it can get you into trouble. And it gives you that opportunity to help coach these employees and become more professional. And I think everybody, you know, falls into these traps of just comfort, and this is a family and we are happy here and we're friends with our coworkers. But we have to remember that it's that hard line that we have to push of work is work, home is home. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try, sometimes those two still get intermixed, and it puts employers in a very difficult position. So that's why that importance of that documentation and those coachings to help them improve their performance is so critical with these different investigations that you deal with, especially on a state and government level with entities like the EEOC.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to get to that. You brought up that concept of like the line, right? Like where's that line? And it is maybe a little bit harder for some people to see than others. I want to get to defining that in a second here. Um, but before we go there, so okay, we kind of discussed, okay, there's all these issues that can arise if we don't get discipline right. We need documentation, we need process. Um, but how in the beginning do you even become aware of situations that require discipline? And the reason I ask that is because I know me as an employee, if I were trying to do something bad, I would not want anyone to know about it, right? And so HR, is maybe kind of decoupled sometimes from certain departments and certain employees, and they just aren't there to always see because like you're saying, Heather, like maybe you guys see the line a lot better, but you're not always there to observe it. Um, Jessica, do you have any thoughts on this? And then I'd love Katie as well. What can HR be doing to find out when something is going wrong that requires discipline?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, your policies and procedures need to be documented and communicated clearly and repeated often.
Hmm.
And ideally, you have established a culture of performance, which essentially has peer to peer accountability. So, in a culture of performance where there is high performers holding one another accountable, everyone knows the rules and the policies and procedures and what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. Individuals are holding each other accountable. And then there's some type of policy that says, see something, say something, if you will.
Mhm.
And some people might look at that as, tattling or ratting on someone. But in a high performing culture of performance, it's just pure accountability. Everybody wants to succeed in their own positions. The organization wants to succeed, and they're going to hold each other accountable. So ideally, that is being raised to the surface pretty quickly. Again, just also to with the accountability, you should have regular reviews. So to Heather's point, kind of discussing these things early and often, and intervening when necessary before they become bigger issues is really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. Katie, anything that you would add to that? How
I
you go
think
about
that,
discovering these issues? Yeah.
yeah, that sums it up really well. I think, like, with that, like, as you come into HR, you're going to know, like, the leaders of the divisions and stuff pretty well, like the different managers. And you can maybe spend a little more time with them than all employees to help them understand the line as well. And so as they understand the line, as they're comfortable with you, even if you're not in that situation, they're going to be able to come, and then you can do everything else that, like Jessica said.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of kind of relationship building too with some of these senior leaders so that they can kind of pass it along. I want to jump back to what you were talking about, Jessica, around culture, right? Because I think you did bring up an interesting point there where it's like, yes, we want to encourage people to tattle on each other, right? But even just saying that word elicits certain emotions, and the teams are probably very close in some sense and don't want to do that. I want to just open it up to anyone. How can you create a culture like Jessica was just saying that's like based around performance and people really are invested in just doing the right thing and that kind of a thing? Any
I,
thoughts?
I
Go ahead.
think it comes from and it's a simple thing, and I see it in so many aspects of our lives, not just in HR but also in the home, is creating and celebrating the positives. Like you don't want to focus on the negatives. Everyone looks at progressive disciplinary as a negative thing. Turn it into a positive experience. I'm very passionate about progressive discipline through training. We're all human. We're gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. The key is don't make the same mistake twice. So let's identify the mistake. Let's grow from it in every situation. What can the employee do better? What can the company do better? And promote those positive aspects of it so that you're showing the whole system is accountable for it. It's not just isolating one particular person, and really pushing that culture of positivity and trying to eliminate those words out of the vocabulary. Like I hear it all the time. I don't want to be a tattletale. I don't want to be a snitch. I don't want to be, someone ratted me out. No, we're holding you accountable. Like, this is all about accountability. I want you to perform the best of your ability, just like you would want your coworkers to perform the best of your ability. And we should all hold ourselves accountable. It's creating that cadence of accountability and pushing those positives in that culture. It's
Yeah.
not easy, but
Yeah.
consistency is key.
Yeah. That's a great rebrand there, from tattletaling to accountability. That sounds a lot better. I like that. What
Jessica
other
hit it on the
thoughts?
head.
Yeah. What other thoughts do you guys have? I mean, if no one else has anything they want to share on kind of building that culture of accountability, that's fine too. But anything else that we want to share?
I would just add that it's one of the biggest obstacles I see from preventing a good company to becoming a great company. And it's one of the fastest things that can deteriorate an organization is not holding individuals accountable. So with the culture of accountability, one way you can actually kind of tangibly create that is through actual value creation, doing your values and reiterating that in different ways. So again, often people will look at values as kind of this like fluffy, abstract thing, but there is a way to kind of build that into the culture to show individuals what's acceptable, what's tolerated, what's celebrated in an organization, and what's not, right?
Mm.
And then again, that's where that pure accountability. So one of those values could be something along the lines of radical candor. So essentially, here we hold each other accountable. So actually having a value that's around that will set the precedence for the organization. So then it's not this, I'm going to call things out. It's just, this is how things are done here. We're here to help each other. We're here to help each other grow, but we're also here to help each other hold ourselves accountable and help each other grow. So again, to Heather mentioned, it's not easy, but it's actually more difficult to do it the other way.
Yeah. Avoid a lot of problems by doing the culture stuff up front. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. This is a lot of great stuff. Melinda, I want to bring you back into the conversation here on kind of our next topic. So, whether or not you have the culture in place that makes it easy for people to surface issues, some issues are eventually going to come to HR's plate, whether it's just like a simple complaint or a more formal something that gets submitted to you. How do you know what actually merits discipline? And just to like give some context here, let's say, Greg comes into the office and he accidentally spills his coffee on so and so, and he's so upset. Or somebody cooks fish for lunch, and someone comes to HR and says, you need to put an end to this, right? Like, so those are some kind of funny examples, but maybe there are some that are a little bit closer to the line. You're not really sure. How would you go about defining, what actually needs to be disciplined?
So that is a really great question. One of the things that I would look at is the employee handbook. So I believe it was Jessica that referred to having a code of conduct, having employee standards and expectations of how to act in the workplace. I'd also look at the frequency and the severity. So is this one time that Greg spilled his coffee on somebody, or is he spilling his coffee on Melinda every Friday? You know that, she wants to go home early, so you're helping her out. It would also depend on, is it so severe that you have somebody that is getting burnt by the coffee? Or is it really just one of those, you need to get a Tide stick to clean up your pen? So I would look at the frequency and the severity, and also how it ties with the code of conduct and the expectations. And in addition, the last thing I'd look at is how many other times have we talked to this person about that specific issue? Is this the first offense, or have we talked to Greg 4 other times? So it may have happened 4 other times, but did we talk to Greg each time that he spilled the coffee? So I would look at that as well. And that also helps dictate what level or severity of discipline that we would administer based on how many previous conversations have been held.
Yeah. That was super great and thorough. Katie, do you have anything you'd want to add to that? So, are you gonna terminate Greg for spilling the coffee or what?
Well, I try not to get involved in terminations. I always leave that to the manager. That's one of the fun things about not being a director yet. But actually, everything I was thinking was exactly what Melinda said. So I think she covered it perfectly.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Frequency, like it sounds like you're really diving into the context of the situation, not generalizing, which makes a lot of sense. So, okay, so the issue comes to your attention, you decide that you need to do something. Heather, I'm gonna kick this one over to you because I know you've already brought up this term a couple times, which is progressive discipline. Um, so I'd love for you to just kind of explain that concept to everyone. And then I want to walk through together like what's on the table here. Cause I know I hear a lot like suspension, write up, I don't know, demerits. I don't know what other terms there are, but there's just this whole bunch of like formal disciplinary things. But anyway, I want to kick it over to you, Heather, and just you need to discipline someone. What's your next step?
It's true. It's not fun. And really, you kind of have to start from the ground up. So, again, knowing that we're all human, we're going to make mistakes. Um, a great training that I actually just listened to the other day advised that with your progressive disciplinary policy in your handbook, it's always good to leave you some wiggle room because every situation you're going to encounter needs to be looked at as that individual basis. How severe is it? Um, is it really, really bad? Is it a safety concern if you're in a high safety sensitive area? So you want to make sure that your disciplinary policy is not so strict that you don't have that wiggle room because there may be situations where you kind of have to move around a little bit. So depending upon the situation that's brought to you, you want to look at it and say, okay, have we addressed this? Is this really the first time this is happening? Because the first time it's happening, maybe we just have a conversation. Maybe they're not 100% sure. Maybe it's their third or fourth day and they haven't really gotten into knowing what those rules are, the policy is. Or Joe has not worn his uniform correct for the 20th time, and we've talked to him about it between all five of our managers at least two or three times each. Well, how do we validate that? So, one of the things that I always like to remind everybody is that a verbal conversation has still not occurred unless you have it documented somewhere.
Hmm.
And that documentation can very easily be just a quick email to the HR department. Just, hey, FYI, I just had a quick chit chat with so and so today about making sure that the uniform was worn correctly. Just wanted to make you aware. And that's one thing that I like to help with my managers is I know you guys are busy. You're running around like chickens with your heads cut off. You're wanting to make sure that your operation's running. So you don't have time to remember how many times you've talked to so and so about their uniform issue. So usually I'll have them just send me an email. And if I start seeing a name occur quite frequently, I'll give the heads up of, hey guys, you guys have talked to this employee a lot about this specific issue. So whoever, if it happens again, just as a heads up, we may want to move to the next step. So say we've already done that, we've pulled them in, we've done an actual written verbal saying, hey, we really need you to do this. Here's a new copy of our attendance policy. Walk them through it. Is there any questions? Do you understand what the expectations are? Because again, you can't expect them to correct it if they don't understand what they're doing wrong. So we need to make sure we're setting those expectations clearly and give them an opportunity to understand it. Or if you are moving to a written, say you've talked to them about this before, they're still not doing it, and you move on to a full written, they also need to understand that the written is not necessarily an admission of guilt. Maybe there was a misunderstanding in that situation. Give them an opportunity to just write down their side of the story of, hey, I disagree. This is my version of it because, like we all know, there's eight sides to every story. You stand looking one way and there's a million other things going on behind you and you just don't see everything. So we need to be a little bit understanding of their perspective as well and what was going on at that time. So we still need to address the issue, but we don't necessarily need to come in like dictators and be like, no, 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 let's be understanding to their situation as well. Give them their opportunity. And just again, reiterate the policy. Just say, okay, awesome. I appreciate, that you understand, but this is, what our side is, and I appreciate your side. We just want to reiterate this policy and make sure you're aware of it, and then move from there. But if you also have a situation that's quite a bit more severe, like if you are in a high sensitive, safety sensitive function, and there was a severe safety violation that could have put other people at risk, you may need to escalate that quite a bit. It may need to be hey, whoa, we're grateful nobody was hurt right now, but this cannot happen again. We need to put you on a final. This is your one and only chance. We need to stress the importance of it. And again, reiterate the expectations, make sure they understand, give them that opportunity to ask questions. And if they need assistance in coaching, provide that to them. Talk to the management team. Hey, let's redo the training for this person on this specific situation. Let's put them back through the program. Let's help them and set them up for success and go from there. That was a lot.
I'd like to add some things, Stephen, if I may.
Go
So,
for it.
in addition to the documented verbal, which I love, Heather, that you said that it should be documented. I know it's a verbal, but it should be written, because if something wasn't documented, it didn't happen. So documented, written, final, suspension, term. There's also a performance improvement plan, and I typically see this more with exempt roles. So salaried professionals. Say you have an engineer and they are just not meeting your expectations. And it would not be as typical to put them through some of the same phases of a progressive discipline. It may be more appropriate to put them on a performance improvement plan or a PIP. And what a PIP is an agreement that's through the manager, HR, and the exempt employee that identifies what are the deficiencies. Where is this person not performing? And then a lot of times I have the employee themselves create their own action plan of how they're going to achieve and meet the expectations, because it puts the ownership back on them. And if they're creating their goals instead of me creating it, it's more likely they're going to obtain them. So once they've identified the PIP and we evaluate over a 30, 60, or 90-day period, we see a lot of success in people turning around their performance. A lot of times it's just not understanding that as an exempt employee, it may not be that we're violating a safety policy, but maybe the projects are not hitting our time, for our customers, or maybe it's not to the detail or the depth that we need. So the performance improvement plan is also another kind of a cherry on top option in addition to the progressive discipline stages that Heather listed.
Yeah. That's great. Go
People
ahead.
seem to be more vested when they are involved.
Yeah.
That's
Jessica, I think you had a thought too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've also seen performance improvement plans not followed through on. So not held up, meaning that there's a performance improvement plan in place. The employee agreed to it. There was a 30, 60, 90-day term. And then once that occurred and the things were still happening, it wasn't followed through. There was no final disciplinary action taken. And that really sends a message to everyone else in the organization, particularly people close to that individual, that there are no consequences. So just a reminder that if you are going to go to the PIP plan, or really any progressive disciplinary plan, to follow through on it, because it is just as important to do that and uphold all the policies and procedures as it is to talk about it and remind people of them.
Yeah.
Jessica, my trick for that is put a calendar reminder, because you're exactly right, especially a 90-day PIP. A lot of times people forget to do the follow-ups. So I put a calendar reminder on the managers and my calendar at the 30 mark, 60-day mark, et cetera, so we can make sure that we're touching base. But you're exactly right. You have to follow through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be less. I've actually seen where it's the manager just had a second guess or didn't want to lose there was like the scarcity of well, I'd rather have an employee than no employee, right? Or whatever the case is. So that's really where an HR professional can kind of coach and counsel the manager to say, hey, here are your options. Here's what's going to happen if we choose option A or option B. And that way everybody's fully aware of what this entails, because especially if you're the person in the HR role, you're going to want to follow through on it. So make sure everyone understands what that entails.
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting a good view here of sort of the tool set we have to use to help employees kind of come back on track, right? We've got the written verbal. We've got, at the end of the line, we've got termination, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second. PIP. We've got some more formal write-ups and things. And we've got a lot of, so I want to talk about suspensions actually next. And Katie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this first, but we have a ton of great comments that I just want to feature on screen and just call out. Bring it all the way back to our conversation on culture. This from Tamara. I would say these values should be held accountable from the top down. If you don't have that buy-in from leadership, or you don't hold upper level leadership to the same standards, you cannot expect the same from lower level staff. 100%. Brandon's coming in here. Documentation is the area where most managers, leaders, and even HR partners fail to lean in. Cannot stress this enough. To be fair and effective, you must document. There are some great tools and resources that you can use to better your documentation experience. And that's one of our final topics we'll go a little bit deeper in together. Again, also want to shout out Susie here. Again, she agrees accountability comes from the top. Steven's paper trail everything. One more here. Actually, we've got a few more, and actually a question for the audience. So you should also be documenting these verbal conversations, like you said. Heather, great sentiment from Brandon here. You have to be sweetly bold, direct, but empathetic. So that's great kind of when you're actually having these conversations. And then from one more here. As a former union business agent, that's how I win things when employers do not follow up on PIPs or document things. So documentation and follow-up, super important to make that method effective, like you were saying, Jessica. Okay, thank you so much to our audience. Keep them coming. Katie, I want to turn it over to you now and additionally open up to anyone else. Suspension is a topic we haven't brought up, which I see kind of in the toolkit in terms of discipline. Katie, what are kind of your thoughts on suspension, like when it should be used and any other thoughts you have around it as a tactic in general?
Yeah, so I've never had to deal with suspension like actually in the workplace. So everything I know is, I guess, probably more theoretical. And so I hope once I say my stuff that everybody else feels free to jump in. I think suspension is, it's kind of like the last step normally before termination, right? It's kind of like, okay, we need time. Maybe the person needs to have some time to think things through. Something happened, they need to make some changes. Maybe there's something in the personal life that caused an event at the workplace that resulted in this disciplinary action, and they need to get that fixed. And I think suspensions are a good way to give that little bit of time for things to get resolved, for maybe them to learn. I almost feel like I'm talking about it like a timeout. I don't always think that's the best mindset, but
and you're not wrong.
yeah. So it's a good opportunity for that, kind of just like a last chance, like, hey, like we're going to give you some time, get these things fixed, and we're going to come back and try this one more time.
Yeah. Almost sounds like a gift you're giving them, honestly, where it's like, hey, take a step back and think about things, and then let's meet again.
It can also be a gift to the employer, though, too, Stephen. How it can be a gift to the employer is if something is so egregious and you need to investigate it, you can suspend them pending the investigation. It gets them if there's any potential volatile situation, or maybe there's suspicion that they were under the influence of drugs at the workplace. This allows you to send them home, get them out of the workplace, you investigate, make sure you have your documentation, and then you can make that formal business decision. So suspension is sometimes a favor for the employer as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't want to make a bad situation worse. And suspension is something I feel like you shouldn't take lightly. There's quite a few things that you want to look at with suspension. Is one, you want to check your company policy. What does your company authorize you to do? And then you have to decide, is this going to be a paid suspension or is this going to be an unpaid suspension? And what does your company have previously done? Like, again, you're looking with HR, it's always what you do for one, you do for all. So what precedents has your company set previously with these situations, because you can't, suspend one person for, oh, I spilled coffee on me, so you're suspended for 3 days, but this person spilled coffee and they didn't get a suspension at all. Like, what's going on? And you have those questions. So you have to make sure you're being fair and consistent, even in your progressive disciplinary actions, especially with suspensions, but also even leading up to termination. What laws are there? Like, I've spent hours reading Utah legislative codes, and there are notes in there about suspensions and whether it's paid or unpaid. So, do you know what your state laws are? So, there's lots of things that you need to take into consideration. And sometimes the best thing is just to consult with your employment law attorney, to just be safe, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of details that go in there. But you want to be consistent. And especially if you are looking at harassment cases, or whether it be sexual harassment or discrimination or anything like that, sometimes you just need to remove people from the situation while you find out what's really going on. And that's where you can, tell them, hey, we don't know. We just don't want to make a bad situation worse. So we're going to send you home on a paid suspension, but be clear about the suspension. How many days is it going to be? Is it pending investigation? There are some times where investigations take just a couple days. Other times, if you're waiting to get information back from other people, it can be longer. And you don't want to leave the employee out there in no man's land, not knowing what's going on, because that's just going to create more problems. So you definitely want to look at it.
And I want to say Brandon agrees with you here. You must have a clear goal in mind,
Mhm.
a date to return, goals to do while they're out. Lots of good thoughts there. And we also have another thought from Tamara here. While you're investigating, the suspension helps, like we talked about. It can protect that employee from false accusations. So lots of agreement in the comments here. I want to move on from suspension for a second. I think we've covered that really well, and talk about termination. So this kind of feels like the ultimate escalation. And actually, I'd love to hear your thoughts if there's anything worse than termination. Maybe you're trying to claw back wages or do something else kind of crazy, legal action. Maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe we won't. But termination, right? Where is the line? How do you know if somebody kind of deserves a second chance or another chance, or if it's really just this is it? And Jessica, I'd actually love to hear your thoughts on this one first, and Katie as well. But where is the line? When do you know that it's time to send them on their way?
Yeah, great question. So my answer should be fairly short and sweet. From my vantage point is, what is documented as a clear policy procedure? What is the severity? What procedures, what disciplinary procedures have taken place? And was it grounds for termination, essentially? Did you do everything right in that? And this is a little cheap, but to Heather's point, sometimes it's best just to involve your labor attorney. But something, for instance, theft that was, caught on camera, that could be grounds for immediate termination. Again, something regarding, a personal story would be actual, like, physical altercation that was witnessed by many people. So again, anything that's clear violation of the policies and procedures that have grounds for termination, and or the severity of it, plus the witnesses and things of that nature, could be grounds for termination.
Hashtag Oscars.
Oh yeah, unless it's the Oscars.
Yeah.
That gets past apparently.
Lots of witnesses there for sure, but the severity apparently wasn't what they. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, different topic, huh? Katie, anything you'd add to that? Where would you draw the line in terms of knowing when to actually terminate?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what Jessica said. It's you have your policy and you really need to follow that, and it's so important. I feel like in HR we're seen as the rule abiders. We love rules, and we do. We have to follow the policy. We have to do things right. And then, like she said, the severity of it, So if it's really extreme, and then like we have to look at all of our documentation of it, and it's hard. Like we want to believe in people, we want to give them second chances. Sometimes they give us these sob stories, but there comes a point when there's a line and we have to move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie and Jessica.
Yeah, one important thing to note there is not to terminate on a whim. So in smaller organizations, and a lot of our audience is kind of wearing an HR hat in like a smaller, fast-growing organization. And it's really important that you can't just, terminate someone because you're having a bad day. I have seen people do that before. Those are the things that I'm sure Heather and Melinda are very familiar with, that maybe have come back, and apparently some of our audience members too, that leave you vulnerable for litigation.
Yeah.
The employment at will statement for the U.S. I mean, so many people see state law that says, "Well, it's employment at will. I can fire you anytime." It's not that easy. It's really not. You put yourself at so much risk, like Jessica had said. If you just fire someone, they can come back and make allegations. It's free and it's easy for anybody to file an EEOC claim. They just go on EEOC.gov and you check the boxes. And all of the burden of proof has to fall on the employer to disprove every single allegation that they can make. So absolutely, don't hide behind the state law that it's employment at will.
Yeah.
I agreed. It takes up so much time, money, resources. Like you don't think about it, but I've been in those situations where one person, we didn't even terminate them, they quit and still filed all of those suits. And one of the big things that you're going to see with unemployment cases is they do ask, if this person didn't voluntarily quit, would they have been terminated? You have to think of all those things, and it absolutely comes back down to, what did the employer do? And a big thing that you have to look at is this a situation that is severe enough that with coaching and with training and with documenting and mentoring, is this going to improve, or are we putting the rest of our employees in an unfair situation because of one person? It should never be like some situations, like obviously with extreme violence, theft, potential safety hazards where they're putting other people again at risk, will be no brainers. And those should be outlined very clearly within your handbook and the company policy. Those should be absolutely no brainers. I listened to an HR podcast the other day that was talking about, we accidentally hired an axe murderer, situations like that, where it's like, we better make sure we're reviewing our policies and being careful. But at the same time, what are you doing to the rest of your workforce by keeping one person and by continuously trying to work with them and trying to help them improve? Like, you're trying to do right by this person. What kind of environment are you creating for the rest of your staff? Are you putting them in a bad situation? And you have to take those things into consideration. And again, sometimes you need a second set of eyes. Sometimes get another HR mentor or an HR person in the community and just run it by them and say, this, I just need some advice. This is the situation. Like, if you are a small company, you most likely have, you do your benefits through an insurance broker. They usually will have an HR consultant that might be part of it, that doesn't cost you any money, that you can go to and say, hey, I need some help. I need some advice. This is the situation. This is what we've been trying to do. Is there anything else that you can think of that we could do to help this individual, or do we just need to look at termination, and get an outside perspective? Because sometimes you do just get so frustrated and involved, and you get emotionally invested, and you don't want to make these decisions emotionally. You need to make sure you have a clear head, that you have your documentation in order, because if they come back and they file that wrongful termination lawsuit with the EEOC, you better be able to prove that you identified the problems, that you gave them every opportunity to correct their behavior, and that you did everything you could to help this person, and they just didn't want to change. I mean, you can only control what you can control. You can't force people to change. But if the behavior is severe enough, is it going to cause issues with everybody else? There's many factors that you need to look at when you're looking at that.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a couple additional things here that we just keep coming back to, which is documentation. Sounds like it's going to be everything for when someone comes back and says, actually, this was illegal and you owe me XYZ or whatever it be. So documentation. And actually, Heather, could you just share real quick? So we're kind of up against time here. We just have one more topic to go over, but can you just share really quickly your documentation process?
So I love documentation, and I've got a couple different ways to do it. The first thing you want to do is anytime you get a complaint, you want to make sure that you realize that even if it's verbal, you've been put on notice. You are aware of a situation that is happening, so you need to be as proactive as possible. You want to start looking into the situation. How severe is it? And anytime that you coach people or talk to them, you want to have it documented down. Sometimes these can be a memo to the file, sometimes it's an email, and that's usually where I'll start with is just a quick email that has the supervisors and HR involved in any applicable management team that might be dealing with this individual and say, hey, just real quick, we did a coaching on XYZ. If there's any training involved, we have them re-sign the training documents advising that they've been retrained, that they understand the expectations.
Yeah.
And then we go from there. Memos to the file about, hey, we went through this retraining, we touched base on XYZ, we just want this in their documentation because one, it just shows that they've had additional training, which is never a bad thing. But it also shows, again, that you've had additional training. So if they continue to do things wrong, then you want to have a sheet, some kind of written document that shows the progressive disciplinary actions. You never want it to be a surprise. So you can say, hey, this is going to be a verbal warning, or this is a written warning, or this is a second, or this is a suspension for X amount of days, or this is termination. And you want to be able to clearly define what the issue is. What is the violation? And be able to list it out for them. Then what is the expectation? Make sure they're resetting the expectation. Have a space for them to write down their version of what happened, or if they want to write anything on there, because a lot of people will come up and say, well, I didn't get to say my side of the story. So it's always good to have just some kind of area for them to put down their documentation.
Yeah.
And then be able to have signatures. Again, reminding them this is not an admission of guilt. This is just documentation that you and I have had this conversation, that we're reiterating what the expectations are so that we both know going forward that you're aware of what your expectations are. And you can have even a line for a witness if the person just blatantly refuses, like, I will not sign it, period, end of story. Okay, we have a witness involved, especially if you're in those talks with a person of the opposite gender. You may want to make sure you have another person in there just to avoid claims. You want to make sure you're in an enclosed environment because remember, progressive disciplinary action is not public knowledge. You should never talk about an employee's progressive disciplinary action with anybody else but that employee and the applicable management team that may or may not need to, as a need to know basis, essentially.
Yeah.
And then make sure it's filed appropriately. So be mindful of where you're at, what you're doing, and make sure that it's the violations clearly defined, what the expectation is clearly defined, so that they know what they need to do going forward. And you need to have all of that so that in the event it does go to some kind of legal, you're able to pull up your company policies, you're able to pull up the training documents, you're able to pull up, hey, this is how many times we've talked to them, here's everything. You can hand it right over to the state or to the investigator or whoever, and all of that goes in that investigation file so that when you are in those court proceedings or you're in those mediations, they're able to look at it and go, well, but you said here that you were trained on this, but yet this time they talked to you about it, they told you what the expectation is, here's the training. So the company did give you every opportunity and you just still didn't do it. And they can't say, well, I didn't know. Like, well, we told you 5 times. Here's the evidence to show, you know. So it's good to have that just as thoroughly as you can, even if you think it's something small. Especially in investigations, every day I have an investigation log if I have one of those where I'm documenting things down that I'm finding. And if I talk to somebody about something, I document it down so that I can show the timeline of, yes, I talked to this person at this time. And then if progressive disciplinary action is warranted, then I'm able to say, hey, on this day, this day, this day, and this day, we talked to you about X, and it's still an issue. So we're just making sure that we're bringing it to your attention officially on paper. Here you go.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I mean, we got emails, we got digital files, signatures, witnesses. Obviously, like we want to be really thorough here. So really appreciate that, Heather. I think that covers it all really well. I want to go to just our last topic here, which is around who is doing this and who are we bringing in to help us. And Melinda, I want to give this over to you because I know before our conversation, you were kind of bringing up, you know, where you're giving this discipline, who is giving it. It really changes the way it's received. And then maybe Jessica, if you have any additional thoughts, you can close out that topic. But go ahead, Melinda.
Absolutely. You really need to think about the physical context, the psychological, or psychology behind the conversation. If HR administers the disciplinary action, it puts a different sense of severity to the employee than if a manager does. If the conversation is held in the employee's office that they normally office in, and HR and the manager walk in, they are automatically going to be a little more comfortable because that's their own safe area. And then versus if they go into the HR office, it's like going to the principal's office, even though like some HR are really cool, like us, obviously. But, just the thought of having to go into HR's office sometimes has that kind of, ooh. So sometimes I look at, let's have the first conversation in the manager's office, or if we've talked to them multiple times about behavior, let's maybe step it up and have it go into the HR office or have HR administer the conversation, just because it puts that different level of severity. I would also look at your physical location sitting when you have the conversation. So unfortunately, I've had a situation where I was facing the door, facing the employee and a manager, and the employee was in front of the door. The employee got very irate about the disciplinary action, and I'm automatically trapped. So the employee is in front of the door, the manager is in the corner, and I'm against the wall. So you've got to think about your physical locations too, about where people are sitting, and make sure that you have an exit strategy. So if we are able to, not be able to de-escalate that, how do we get out of the office, or what do we do? So you've always got to look at your personal safety as well as how it's being interpreted or perceived when you meet with them.
Yeah. Thanks, Melinda. Jessica, anything you would add to that?
Yeah. So we talked about who should be handling it. And I think this is really important for anyone who is not in an HR position, a formal HR position, to hear is everything we've discussed just in this short period of time. As you can tell, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of complexity. And oftentimes I hear business leaders kind of, look, poo-poo the importance of human resources, depending upon the size and stage of the company. And just from this brief conversation, we can tell how serious it is and how complicated it can get and what the consequences could be. So if you are a business leader, an executive, a business owner, anything like that, I'm just going to encourage you to hire a professional, HR consultant, someone on your team that has HR experience, and or a labor attorney on retainer, which is very expensive. And if you are someone who has been given the reins to hold an HR unofficial position, for instance, you're an executive assistant that also wears 7 other hats, I would advocate, first, educate yourself. Second, advocate for yourself that you would like to have this additional training, whether it's the free resources on Eddie and HR Mavericks, or whether it's going to a conference or a training like SHRM. Just advocate for yourself and start to educate your employer about how serious it is and how important it is to not only the culture of your organization, but the financial health and how it affects all of your resources, your people resources, your financial resources, your time resources, if you don't do it right. So if you have more than 5 employees, it's an essential part of your toolkit.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. That was kind of our last big topic. Obviously, we've covered so much already. And I just want to give everyone kind of a short, sweet moment at the end here to just drop their final bits of advice to people who are saying to themselves, man, how do I get started? How do I get started improving our employee discipline processes and procedures? And so just in a sentence or two, we're going to get everyone's thought here at the end. Katie, we'll start with you, and then just kind of work backwards. Jessica, Melinda, and then Heather. What last, in a sentence or two, bits of wisdom do you have for these people listening?
Yeah. So for me, I'm sure I'm the newest in HR of everyone here, and the hardest part is just like kind of having those initial conversations, because normally like you have like the verbal and the written warnings a lot more than like the terminations, and those can be really scary. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got that I'm going to pass on is to look at the problem with the employee, right? So if you like are sitting with an employee, you're having a problem, like don't imagine like it's not between you, but you put it to the side and you guys look it together. So it's not, hey, you have bad attendance, like we don't like this, but it's, hey, you have poor attendance. How can we help you so we can improve things?
Yeah.
And it's just like, it was a mental shift for me to really help me get started in having these conversations and see employee discipline become more positive.
Awesome, Katie. That's powerful. Jessica, over to you. Last bits of wisdom.
Well, Katie, where were you when I was starting out? I could have used that coaching. Yeah, I think we've all said document. So that means starting with the policies and procedures. What are they? And then as things arise in the workplace, because new things will come about all the time, whatever happens, document it, and then start to review if you need a policy or a formal procedure in place, and that can help you build on it. So I'll just say document.
Yeah. Great. Melinda, last
So we
advice
tell
here.
you,
Yeah.
we tell you to document, but what do you document? So what you should document, you can use a specific model. It's called the SBI model. You identify the situation, the behaviors, and the impact. So what exactly happened? What were the behaviors that contributed to that situation? And then what was the end result? Why is this bad? Incorporate your employee policy when you do this SBI model, and you use that format, and it'll help you through any disciplinary action, and it'll help you whenever you have any type of external complaints.
Yeah. Love it. Heather, last word to you.
Do your research, be careful with your definitions, and get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. You know, HR Mavericks has their HR answers. You don't have to say your name. Put your question in it. Other HR people will come out and they will help you. HR Mavericks has our Slack channel. Ask people for help. Use the communities. There's lots of people out there that will help you if you just ask. Be very, very careful with your verbiage. Insolence and insubordination are not the same thing. They are very different. You can absolutely be insolent and disrespectful and not be insubordinate. You do exactly what they tell you to. So verbiage is very, very, very particular. And I always say, when in doubt, go back to your policies, go back to your handbook, use the verbiage that your company has. You're less likely to get in trouble that way. You're just quoting the expectations straight from the company. But you're going to be put in these situations where you're not comfortable having conversations. I used to have these conversations with people who were armed, and those are hard conversations to have. So make sure that you put yourself in a safe environment. If you don't feel comfortable having those conversations with someone in person, it's okay to sometimes make the decision to use the phone instead, for if that's really what's going to be the best and safe way to do it. But have those conversations with your attorneys, with your senior leadership, and just say, hey, we're going to have a hard conversation with this person. I don't want to put anybody else at risk, especially if it's going to be potentially volatile or put someone in a safety situation. And those may be the ones off, but make sure that you're looking at all of those when you're looking at these situations, even the small things. It makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Heather. And thank you to each one of you for being on this panel today. We always kind of show the slide at the end. If you want to learn a little bit more about employee discipline, although I think we covered everything really, really well here, if you don't have at least some good ideas after listening to this, then. But check out this article. We have, I think, a dozen or so additional articles and kind of more compliance topics. So check out that in our encyclopedia, and also go meet these panelists. Connect with them on LinkedIn. They're all amazing. They're super generous with their time and very giving and just good people. So thank you to you four for being here. This has been awesome, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day. So,
Thank you.
bye, everybody.